And was that just that sense of freedom then? Was that like, was it to go somewhere? Was it a sense of being in the world? How would you kind of characterize it?
Both, definitely being in the world. It was like, I mean, I played rugby, and when I was a young person, rugby was my outlet. Rugby was a place where I found some freedom, where I could be creative and I could get rid of aggression, and it was one place where kind of elders would value me. Like at school, I wasn't valued, but these fellas said, "You're good, Simon," and like you got courage and you got good spirit, and I got good feedback, and an important kind of place for me to develop. When I turned 18, 19, 20, I was a general nurse, and that was really interesting because I discovered a capacity to be with others in a way which is very compassionate. A lot of nurses were kind of fairly technical, and they were good at what they did. I was not very good at the technical side, like giving out the drugs and stuff. But I was very into like caring for the dying, talking to relatives. I used to get told off by ward sisters, strict ward sisters, who say, "Nurse Weston, go and do some work. Stop talking to the patients." And I used to think, well, talking to the patients is the work. This is the work. Like these people are sort of dying, they're suffering, they need compassion. And so I went on to study psychiatric nursing, which allowed me to kind of do more of the kind of compassionate piece. But it was the hospital was kind of run in a quasi-military way. It's like your matron, your sisters. It was it's kind of strict, and it's uniforms and stuff. So there's these structures there, but within that structure, I found some freedom, and outside that structure, I found great freedom. I mean, I was like I say, I was going to all these alternative gigs, and I was discovering. I grew up in a fairly all-white culture, and then I go downtown Bristol to St. Paul's, and it was kind of Caribbean culture and punk culture mixed in with that, and it was like just really kind of vibrant time, and it was really energizing, and people were questioning politics. Or I was learning about kind of racism. I was learning about politics, things I hadn't come across before, and it was really sort of engaging. Yeah, just I felt like I was alive. And you asked about travel, and I started to travel then as well. So I've traveled, like different cultures really interested me. Like I was hitchhiking everywhere, including to the west of Ireland where I've ended up living. But I'd go, I'd go to Israel on my own quite often. I just go away, and I go and kind of wander in the desert for a while, and I just do kind of these big kind of travels. And yeah, I was just really enjoying being curious about the world and discovering, an aliveness in this space.
I'd love to touch more on the sense of aliveness, but just the mention there of the wandering the desert. Could you let me know what that entailed?
Yeah, I mean, when I was 5 years old, my brother Stephen died of leukemia. He was 7 years old, and it smashed my family to bits. Like I mean, my dad had a breakdown, and it made when you're young, you don't really make sense of it. But when I was kind of 18 and 19, I was a bit of a party animal, and I had all these friends, and it was really kind of like I was really enjoying life. I had a good job, but the nursing was interested. But I used to go off on my own, and people couldn't make sense of it. They say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "You've got to go and discover your melancholy. You've got to be with your
Oh,
melancholy." I used to say this without really knowing what I was saying. Like I think looking back on it, it was like I understood what loss meant at a young age, and I kind of knew that part of me had to be kind of part of the way I lived. It was like you couldn't kind of just cut that off and be away from it. So when I used to go traveling on my own, I used to sort of just. I remember going to Israel, and I rocked up and I found this mad German guy who was like really funny, and we hitchhiked around Israel, went to all the kind of major sites, and then I went down to Sinai Desert and kind of stayed with the Bedouin and stuff, and just wandered around, and I was just blown away by the beauty, by the stars, by the space, and I get in touch with my melancholy. I get into a place where you'd feel like this. I think I got in touch with grief. I didn't call it grief at the time. I think I got in touch with loss and grief, and it made me feel whole. It kind of made me feel like once I'd done that, I felt better. I felt more re-engaged. It's quite hard to be there and face that, but once I kind of been in touch with that, I realized that kind of something changed within me, and I could live again, or I could engage again in a different way. But if I didn't do that, then I get manic and I get in kind of crazy kind of spaces, but I wouldn't feel happy, I wouldn't feel content.
That expression, "be with your melancholy," is one of the most beautiful things I've heard. For you, like apart from even just the solitude and what you're talking about there, even in like in whether it's engaging with the stars or even if it was a vast space, what would kind of being with your melancholy, even at that stage, even if you weren't calling it grief at the time, what would that kind of feel like or look like?
It's sadness. It's like, it's sadness, but it's not depression. It's interesting. Different times of my life, I've touched on depression. I haven't really been depressed, but I've kind of gone in that direction, and that's a different kind of feeling. My melancholy is something about sadness. It's about holding sadness in part of me. There's a lot of positive psychology. There's a lot of people pushing being positive. I write about the happiness imperative, how we're supposed to be happy all the time. And I'm like, no, 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 no. That's not the way to live, You've got to be in touch with your sadness as well, to be a whole person, to kind of to be alive is to kind of have a whole range of emotions, and that would include anger and sadness and love. But sadness for me is an important one, and it's been a big part of my life.